Welcome back to the live 24-hour Mental Health and Happiness Summit. I am joined now by my dear friend and brilliant Dr. Barnes Boffey. Just a quick introduction of Dr. Boffey. He is a doctor of education. He was the director of teacher training at Dartmouth College for a long time, senior faculty of the WGI, a colleague of mine, a mentor of mine, a teacher of mine. He also is has trained psychologists, people in education corrections in Europe, in Australia, and throughout the United States. Senior faculty of the International Association for Applied Psychology, author of 2 books. And one of the things he did not mention, but I happen to know because I got the inside scoop, he's a playwright. He and a friend of his wrote the play for the Velveteen Rabbit. So, hi Barnes, how are you?
Hi Nancy, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
You've been sneaking around the internet.
Yes. No, I remember. I got a long memory of our association, Barnes. So let me ask you, because I know you have lots of thoughts. Another thing I should say is that you're also a blogger contributor for our Mental Health and Happiness Summit. And one of the most recent blogs that you wrote, I want to dive right into that, and has to do with hoping that your children have difficult times. That's not the way you said it, but the whole notion of if life is too smooth, then when we hit the hard times, we don't know what to do. So I think you know where I'm talking about, don't you, Barnes?
Sure.
Can you share some? Can you chat some about that?
Sure. I think a lot of it has to do with the kind of words that people talk about resiliency a lot these days. And if you look at what makes a sword resilient, what makes a piece of metal resilient, is you put it in the hot, then you put it in the cold, you put it in the hot, you put it in the cold. And what it does is develop a kind of a flexibility and an ability to deal with all sorts of different situations. So I love it when my kids have difficult situations because they get to learn the skills to be able to deal with difficult situations. And what trips people up in their lives are the difficult situations. So I threw one of my workshops participated off one time quite a bit when I said, well, I love to have my kids have an occasional scrape. As teenagers, I love to have them have an occasional scrape with the law. It reminds them that there's a system out there. It reminds them that there's a legal system that's bigger than their dad and their mom, and that they can get in trouble if they do certain things. And luckily, my kids didn't have too much of a problem with that. So, I mean, finding those limits, or having those encounters. And they were all good because they led to some wonderful conversations. And I think that if you look at what I've done a lot of thinking about transformation, and that's really what the camp I run is about, and about the whole way that kids transform from young to old, from boys to men. I deal mostly with at a boys camp, and it has to do with it always has to do with the fall as well as the rising. It always has to do with the wound as well as the healing from the wound. So they have to, in every sort of heroic journey, there's always some kind of a wound that the hero has to recover from, and without that wound, there's no recovery. It's just simple nothing. There's no power to it. So I remember once, and also the perspective changes all the time. One of my sons lost a soccer game to a team he thought they shouldn't lose to. And I said, what do you think about that? He said, oh my God, worst day of my life. This is terrible. This is awful. Well, they then went on, because they'd lost the game, to practice harder, and they went on to win the state championship. And I said to him the day of the state championship, I said, Adam, just out of curiosity, what do you think about that game with South Royalton now? He says, best thing that ever happened to us. Best thing that ever happened to us. So I think that, and again, sort of in a little bit of a diversion, I think whenever you're reaching sort of spiritual truth, which I think is really important in all the things we're talking about, whenever you get there, it's always paradoxical. So that game was the worst thing that ever happened and the best thing that ever happened at the same time. And so having a hard situation. All right, there we go. Back in
Yeah.
business. I don't know why. But I have mobility issues, as I said, between, and so it's hard for me to get around. But one of the good things about that is that, again, being the director of the camp I am, these kids get to watch an older gentleman who's not perfect, who's not, just has everything working for him, who's not, such an ideal they can never aspire to, they have to be that. I mean, I'm a regular guy who's got some mobility issues, and they get to watch me deal with that. And I think in some respects, I certainly teach me more, and I certainly teach them more by being imperfect than I do by being perfect.
Yeah, awesome. It's interesting, certainly in terms of the work that I do with parents, and some of the helicopter parents who want to protect their children from all of those potential hardships. And I just think to myself, first of all, as a parent, I can't imagine. You must go to bed exhausted all the time. But then I also think, to what end? I mean, eventually that kid's going to have a fall one way or another. It's absolutely. Well, I mean, and the other potential consequences, which I've also seen, is now the kid, it doesn't come easily to the child. Now they're easily frustrated. Now they want to get rid of the pain. And there's all sorts of ways now that they can easily get rid of the pain, none of which are productive. It's not guaranteed that it goes that way, but it does guarantee that it's not going to go well for the child, and probably not for the parent either. Okay, so now how?
It's often a shock when people at camp, parents call up all the time and say, are there enough activities so my kid will get a chance to do everything, get to do what he wants when he wants to do it? And I always say, and they sort of do a double take, I said, I hate to run a camp where every kid got to do what he wanted when he wanted to do it. That wouldn't be doing them any good. So.
Right. Well, I can't even begin to think about that and imagine that. Anyway. So tell us, since this is mental health and happiness, have you given thought to how you might define mental health and happiness for yourself and for others?
I think mental health has to do a lot with the things we're talking about. Mental health has to do with being able to, just as you have a physical health, physical health is being able to maintain your ability to function effectively in the world regardless, or not regardless of, but basically in the situation in which you live. So I think mental health is being able to function effectively in the world in which you live, and to accept changes, and to deal with the world on the world's terms. That I don't always have to be changing the world for it to be okay. That I can accept the world the way it is. That doesn't mean I accept, that I approve of war or rape or anything. That's not it. It's saying I can find a way to put that into some place in my brain so that I can continue to function and to be appropriately happy. And being appropriately happy can mean being sad. Being appropriately happy can mean being angry. Being appropriately happy can mean that I am able to adjust who I am to keep my balance in the world, and to maintain the relationships, or to repair the relationships. I mean, again, relationships get dented, they get broken, they get hurt. Can I repair those relationships in a way that I feel respectful? And I think also it has to do with finding our relationship to the universe, finding our relationship to something that's larger than we are, and how we fit, and also accepting that along with everything else.
So how is it that you came to be here in this emotional, physical understanding of yourself and the world, and creating this place for young men?
Well, I guess I was lucky. I went to that camp as a kid, and as a 7-year-old, it was the first place that really understood boys that I'd met. Most of the time in school, I'd been sort of treated as a defective girl. I couldn't sit as long as everybody else. I couldn't write as well. I thought that making those little noises under your armpit were funny. and I drooled, stress, and dribbled stuff. And also, I think primarily my door was alcoholism. That was my entrance into a hole that I couldn't fill myself. That it had to be a hole in my life that my ego and my will couldn't fill. And that way I turned to other people, I turned to a power greater than myself, I turned to something besides.
And here he comes again.
Oh, here you come. Sorry, I don't know what it is. And just so you know, Ken, I don't do anything when that happens. I just wait for it to happen. It just seems to end, and then it says, give another try. So.
Yeah, I believe you. It almost seems like they run out of memory, but I can't imagine what that would be. But
okay.
Carry on.
Okay. There's Ken now.
He forgot. He's gonna mute. He's gonna exit his. There he's gone. So, do you remember where you were?
I forgot.
So it was through the door of alcoholism.
Oh yeah, that's my door. Everybody has to. Sometimes I talk about a God-sized hole. You have to have a God-sized hole in your life, and you can. Again, I'm not particularly religious at all, but I do think that the concept of a higher power and something that there's something larger than we are. I'm pretty convinced. And finding my relationship to that power that's greater than I am has a tremendous amount to do with my mental health and happiness.
With that as your entry point, how is it that you got to start thinking about behavior and relationships and among other things? How did you find Glasser? How did that happen? That experience for you?
I took a workshop because a friend suggested I do it. And Glasser's work took everything that a lot of the things I believed and put them into a consolidated system. Results planning, basic humanistic education, values clarification, all those things were put into a system that really seemed to work and also that I really believed in. Then I threw in what I learned about spirituality from my alcoholism, and it was it was just sort of an explosion that just wouldn't stop. I couldn't stop learning. I just couldn't stop learning. I got more and more and more excited, and I really felt like I found one of the pinnacles of that for me had to do with, I think you were there in Philadelphia when we talked about the difference between the basic needs and basic instructions. And that really was a significant learning for me, one that I've really carried into my life. That we talk about. There's who you want to. There's what you want to do, but we do what we're going to do because we want to be something. That we're human beings. That's the highest level. And so when I began to understand that I had an instruction to be loving rather than to get love, and to be playful rather than to have fun, or to be powerful, then I began to totally turn the way I interacted with the world. A friend of mine continues to say, he said, I remember the first time I met you, I said, well, how's the world treating you? And I looked at him strangely, and he said, I said, I can tell you how I'm treating the world, but I'm not thinking a lot about today about how the world's treating me. And I think that's a tremendous amount to walk into. I was thinking about it. I was taking a young man into a store, and it was a counselor. So I was teaching this counselor a little bit about life. And I said, do you know why we're walking into this store? And he said, yeah, we're going to go get a whatever. I said, no, that's not the reason we're walking to the store. We're going to walk into this store to try and make as many people as we can happy. We're going to try and make we're going to connect with as many people as we can and try and brighten their day and give them something and love them for some little bit. And when we walk out, not only will we have whatever we have in our hand, which we bought, which of course is a function of this process, but you will have something in your heart, and you will have something you walk away with.
Okay. Oh, here it comes.
The good news is it seems to come back. The bad news is anybody who's watching this, feel free to get up and get a latte whenever you want to. You'll have lots of bathroom breaks in this conference call. Anyway, this guy looked at me like I was crazy, and you know, in some respects, the world would call you crazy if you thought that way. But I think looking at it's a truism that my emotions, my feelings come from my behavior. And once I understand that, then I stop focusing on what's going on around me. I start focusing on my own behavior. And once I do that, everything changes. Mm-hmm. So I think without that, you're constantly a victim. You're constantly waiting for the world to be something that you need it to be. And I always say what destroys relationships, whether they're teacher, student, husband, wife, husband, parent, child, is the basic belief that you need to act the way I need you to act for me to feel the way I want to feel. So everybody's got these little TV clickers. They're clicking each other all over the place. You know, I'm trying to get you on channel 7. You're trying to get me on channel 3. I'm trying to get you in. Everybody's all clicking. It's like, no, that's not it. And the point, mental health and happiness is saying, I see the way you're acting. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. But I know how to live in the world. I know how to be okay. I know how to be happy with me, regardless of what you're doing. Now, of course, sometimes you say, I don't want to do that. Or sometimes you say, I can't do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But the issue, my mental health or happiness, is not about what you're doing. My mental health or happiness is my ability to cope with what you're doing. And that, without that perspective, I'm not sure that. And that, I mean, if you look at a societal, the reason it's so hard to be happy in this society, the reason it's hard to be so mentally healthy in this society, is because it really doesn't. It doesn't believe that. It really does say, how does that make you feel? How did that make you feel? This will make you feel that. This will make you feel that. My former partner said, well, how do you think that makes me feel? It's like, oh, I don't know. I wish I could. I don't know. I know what I did, but I think you're going to have to decide how you want to feel about it. And then, of course, the reason she's my former partner, she said, well, don't start that stuff with me, you know. And it's like, I don't know what else to say. I really believe that. It's more than belief. It's like, okay, so, you know.
Right.
As Ken said, Glasser used to say, I like Glasser. What attracted him to Glasser was Glasser had said, I could replace the words mental health with responsibility. And I think that there is a responsibility. And responsibility comes from those two words. And I have an ability to respond in the world. And when I have that ability to respond, and I'm no longer afraid. My life was filled with fear all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm not afraid of what's going to come today. I know that I can handle it. Anything that comes up, I know I can handle it. Now, it's like surfing. You know, we learn to surf on little waves, and then the big waves get bigger, and then we can handle some bigger waves. Now, there are tsunamis that come. Regardless of how good a surfer we are, it doesn't matter. They're still going to knock us on our butts. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. And for different people, for one person, a big wave is one thing. For another person, a big wave is another thing. That the reason we go to a priest when somebody dies is because for them, death is not a tsunami. For us, it may be a tsunami, and they help us to get through that and to begin to find our way to situations. The reason we go to counselors is, you know, if I'm in a difficult situation, but for them, theoretically, being in a difficult situation is not a problem. And that's why, as a counselor, you better have had a lot of disappointments in your life. You better have solved a lot of problems. You're not much good to anybody if all you know is stuff from a book.
Tsunami. When the tsunami hits, there's just some things that we can't, no matter how many skills we have, how flexible we are, the tsunamis hit, and we have to see what happens. So that's, I think, kind of the essence of where you were, Barnes. Can you pick it up from there?
To live.
Yeah.
We are live yet again, picking up our interview with Dr. Barnes Boffey, as if no time has passed at all, although several days have passed. And I've moved west to Colorado since last we chatted. So I don't exactly remember where we were, Barnes. what I do remember is you were talking about one of the questions I remember, no, the answers I remember you gave is that we're all human beings, and that's the highest level to be at. So can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Well, I'm not exactly sure where we were, but I'll see if I can grab some. I think what it sparks in my head is the idea that I know what we were talking about. We were talking about basic needs and those kind of things. That one of the things that I think Bill Glasser and I used to talk about a lot was the difference between needs, which seem to be external to me, to more of instructions, which human beings, in other words, I have an instruction to be something. That's why I'm a human being. And my instruction, I call a psycho-spiritual instruction, is to be loving, to be playful, to be powerful, and to be free. And when I can figure out a way to be that in any situation I'm in, I feel in balance, I feel complete, I feel some sense of wholeness. The other thing I think that's really important in terms of mental health and happiness is understanding that we're always operating at least two levels. One is the doing level, and the other is the being level. And when we get confused about what to do I do this? Do I do that? Do I do this? Do I do that? That's the level at which we experience our conflict. But the actual conflict is always at a level above. So, for example, if I say, shall I call my mother? Well, if I call my mother, she'll be upset that I didn't call. But if I don't call her, then she'll be mad at me because I didn't call. Shall I call? Shall I not call? Shall I call? Shall I not call? You can go around with that all day long. That's at the doing level. What should I do? The trick is to bump it up a level to the being level and ask yourself the question, if I were being the daughter I wanted to be, what would I do? And the answer would be, I'd call her whether I was scared or not. So when you jump a higher level to the being level, you resolve the conflict at the lower level. Most people spend their time thinking about, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? And I think one of the ways to keep yourself clearer is to begin to ask the question, if I were serious about being a good daughter, a good friend, a husband, a wife, brave, strong, whatever it is you want to fill in that blank with, if I were serious about being that, what would I be doing in this situation? And then do it. And the other trick is do it whether you feel like it or not. One of the basic dilemmas that most people face in terms of mental health and happiness is that they wait to feel like doing something before they do it. So they wait to feel like going to the gym before they go to the gym. They wait to feel like applying for a job before they apply for a job. And in fact, that's 180 degrees backward from the way we should be doing it. What we should be saying is, if I were serious about applying for a job, would I make a call or would I not? The great American fantasy is that I can feel like people who do this, people who are like this, but not do what they do. In other words, I want to feel like a strong person without doing what strong people do. I want to feel like a healthy person without doing what healthy people do. And that's where drugs come in, which a drug makes you feel like you're doing something even though you're not doing it. So that really gets people in this negative feedback loop where they can't seem to move. And if I'm afraid of something, for example, if I'm afraid of getting on an airplane and I don't get on the airplane, I'll feel more afraid of flying than I did before. And so it's this downward spiral, and people, well, how do I break out of this? Well, the way you break out of it is to begin to say to yourself, I don't want to be for that example, I want to be a good, I'm mad at I don't feel like talking to my husband. He said something and I don't feel like, I'm going to wait till I feel like apologizing before I apologize. And what's going to happen is you're just going to end up, every time you don't apologize, you're going to feel less like it. So the question is, if I were the kind of wife I wanted to be, would I apologize now or would I wait? And the answer is, I'd apologize now. And so you do it even though you don't feel like it. And that's really, I would say, probably the major path to breaking out of these downward cycles of behavior.
Well, so with that in mind, what about the upward spiral that you're in, and still that's not helping you develop the kind of relationship that you want? When is it that each of us individually says to ourselves, that's enough? I need to be a better person to myself than I am a wife to this fellow.
Right. Well, that's a really good question. Is because if I can't, there's two levels. One is I can't, and one is I won't. I think women typically get stuck more on I can't, and because the cultural myth is that a woman should give it all and have tried every single thing she.
Okay, we're good.
I think that women tend to focus more on where they reach a point where they have to show that they've given everything before they sort of get the applause of the society. So they give everything they can in a relationship to the point where they have to say, I can't do this anymore. And then people say, well, if you can't, that's okay. I think we'd have a lot happier people if we help people to get to the point of saying, I won't anymore. This is no longer, this relationship is no longer functional for me. I've tried everything I can try. And there's a myth too, that you can try everything you can try. That's a horrible standard for people to ask themselves. You know, when counselors ask other people, you think you've tried everything you could try? They haven't. There's no way to try everything you can try. You try. Have you given it your best shot in terms of what you consider to be a reasonable effort? And I sit on the side of saying I'd rather stay in a relationship a year too long than I would leave a minute too early. And I've done that several times. I've always felt good about it. I've always thought that, okay, at least I know now that this relationship is no longer something I either want to participate in or need to change the format of. In other words, I don't need to. I think it goes, if you really want, it goes back to people promising in relationships things they can't promise. They promise the form of the relationship rather than saying, here's what I can do for you. I can promise that I will try and love you. I can promise I will respect you. I can promise I'll try and be generous. I can promise. Those are the things I can promise regardless of the form of our relationship. But I can't guarantee what we're going to exactly look like 40 years from now. I don't think human beings are geared to be able to do that. So friends who say, I'm going to get married, do you have any advice? I say, yeah, watch what you promise. Watch out what you promise, because and I think that in every relationship that I've had, in every long-term relationship I've had, I have tried to maintain my willingness to be loving and to be caring and to be generous and to be respectful, but the form has changed. I said to a client that I've never found a reason to stop loving somebody. The trick is that I have to love them in a new way. And that takes time and that takes adjustment. But I think that being in relationships is hard. And if you have somebody who's willing to negotiate and is a good negotiator, that's wonderful. If you have somebody who's not willing to negotiate, it makes it very hard. And I don't think that I don't think our happiness has to be geared around, okay, no matter what, you made a promise, you have to keep it. That's not the way human beings work.
It's interesting, as a parent, I expected my relationship with my children would change. They weren't going to be infants the whole time.
Yeah. Sure.
But not as adults. A 20-year-old adult is not a 40-year-old adult, is not a 50-plus-year-old adult. And yet there's this assumption that, of course, no one will change along the way. Or maybe there's the hope that you'll at least change.
Well, the old joke was, men think that women won't change. When they get married, men think that women won't change, and they do, and women think that men will change, and they don't.
Right.
There may be more truth to that.
Right. It's so funny. It's true, right?
Yeah.
Well, talk some about some of the what we might call the negative emotions, Barnes. The feeling of sad, or the feeling of loneliness, or despair, anxiety. How do you understand them?
Well, I think emotions, I don't know whether I talked about it before, I guess it doesn't matter. I think there's a difference between emotions, feelings, and intuition. I think our feelings are uh, they're almost only describable in terms of intensity. Our feelings are pharmaceutical, electronic, biological impulses that race through us, that tell us we're becoming aware of something, that tell us something's going on that we need to be aware of, that we need to pay attention to. And then we begin to tell ourselves a story about that intention, and we begin to look around and say, okay, this is what's going on, or that's going on, or how could he do this, or she never does this. And as we tell that story, we actually create the emotion. We create our emotions. We don't create our feelings, but we create our emotions. That's a very hard thing for people to take responsibility for. And so anger is really looking at a situation. And I mean, suppose your husband, or I'm using marriage, but your partner comes to you agreed that she would be home at 6 o'clock, and she walks the door at 7 o'clock. Okay, now you can tell multiple stories about that situation. You can start off by saying, wow, at 7 o'clock, she's really somebody who cares about me. There must be some good reason that she is late, so why don't I give her a loving hello and ask her what's going on. At that point, I'll be hopeful. At that point, I'll be loving. Or she can walk the door. I can think, 6, 7 o'clock. I can't believe she did this again. An hour late and she didn't even call. Well, that story will give you anger. You want to pick out a good resentment. Say, she never does it. She never follows through in anything she does. Put a never or an always in there. You can guarantee a really good resentment. And I think that so we create our own emotions, and learning to tell the story is a way to change how we feel about a certain situation. And then there's an intuition, which I believe is the ability to make contact with, call it the cosmos, call it the universe, call it the energy, call it a higher power, call it whatever you want to call it or whatever it is. Your ability to make contact with that sensation, there's something larger, whatever is larger than us, and it's pretty clear there's something larger than us. What it is, we don't know. And I love the quote that says, if God enough were small enough to be understood, he wouldn't be big enough to be God. We're not supposed to understand it. We're not supposed to get it. It's bigger than we are. So, again, mental health and happiness is the ability to know what you can control and what you can't control. I define anxiety as the sensation that comes when you try and control what can't be controlled. And sadness, the other one you mentioned, I think sadness is a little bit different. Sadness is the emotion that accompanies acceptance. So as I begin to accept a failed relationship, as I begin to accept the fact that I'll never be the ballerina I thought I was going to be, as I begin to accept that I'm 70 years old, as I begin to accept that my life as I begin to accept anything, as I begin to accept that my expectations of the world are not going to always work out, as I begin to accept that, there's a feeling of sadness. But sadness is different from a lot of those other emotions, and the sadness just flows through us. It's like joy; it just flows. It's really. Sadness doesn't scare me at all. I don't mind being sad. It can feel a little bit like breaking down. So, as I was saying, sadness is not an emotion that I'm afraid of, and I like not to be afraid of any emotion. That's my goal. I remember it was a relationship that I was breaking up in several years ago, and my goal was to figure out a way that I knew that I could heal if I could really feel every emotion that I was going to feel about that. So I just let that happen, and I felt anger, and I felt sadness, and I felt desperation, and I felt them all. Actually, the story is, I think, kind of funny. I've been going to the islands for years, the Caribbean, and I went to the Caribbean islands alone, and I went to a resort right around New Year's Eve. I don't know why I did this. This is probably one of the dumbest ideas I ever had. And so I went to this, and everybody's there. First of all, everybody's coupled up. There's not a single person in the whole place. Second of all, they've all got that look like they just spent the whole day in bed. They've all got a little grin on their face. And third, so I'd go down, I'd go to the beach, I'd go to the restaurant, I'd go back to my room, and I'd cry, and I'd cry, and I'd cry. And then I'd go someplace, and I'd go to the beach, go to the restaurant, I'd cry and cry and cry. But it was almost like a little hothouse. It was almost like it was emotions under pressure, and I felt so deeply, but I just let it go. I wanted to feel that deeply. And when I was no longer afraid of what I might feel, I was really free from the relationship.
Oh.
And that's what I needed to do, and that's what I needed to do to begin back. And now I'm wonderful friends with that person because I'm not afraid of any emotions I may have in that relationship, and neither is she. So there's tremendous freedom in being aware that even though you create your own emotions, sometimes some of those are too hard to deal with. They're just. It's not a pejorative thing. It's not you're bad because you create your emotions. It's just that it's like learning to surf. In the beginning, you have little waves you go, and then you get bigger waves, and then bigger waves. But there's always going to be tsunamis. There's always going to be giant waves. No matter how good a surfer you are, you're still going to get knocked on your butt. And that's what life does. And so I just want to put as much energy as I can, and accepting that is part of the whole issue of being happy. Is accepting there are certain situations which are going to be too big for me. And when they're too big for me, what do? And that's a good question. When they're too big for me, I ask for help. I find people who love me. I talk about what's going on. I make connection with the universe. I take care of myself. I eat right. I sleep. If I have to spend a day in bed, I spend a day in bed. I stop punishing myself for not being something. I'm a human being. We're all doing, as Glasser said, one of the best things he ever said was, we all do the best we can with the information we have at the time. And it's a brilliant statement. And when I assume that, when I think that thought, I like the emotion that I feel, because I feel hope and I feel peace.
Awesome. So one of the questions that I've been concerned about in my journey thus far in mental health and happiness, the website, the blogs, now the summit, is the appearance, the potential appearance that all you have to do is spend a little time hugging your dog and walking in nature and not missing a sunrise, and suddenly all is good. And I know that those are good things to do, and that's not it. My concern is the potential of us looking at, approaching things as if in a trivial way. Any thoughts about that, Barnes?
Sure. I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. What matters is who you are when you're doing it. And some things make it easier to be the person you are, and some things make it less. I happen to run a boys' camp during the summer, which the kids love. And parents say, my son loves camp. I say that he may love camp, but what more is, he likes who he is at camp. And coming to terms with who you are is a matter of being honest. And being honest, if you look at the 12-step program in AA, for example, the 12 steps talk about alcohol in one step. What they talk about the rest of the time is your relationship with the higher power and being honest. And I think being honest on a daily basis is the hardest thing in the world. It's the hardest thing to show up. And I've sort of got a mantra, I'm not sure where I learned it, but which I really like, which is show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and release the outcome. And that seems to synthesize a lot of very deep philosophy in a very short amount of time. So telling the truth is hard. We're afraid if we tell the truth, we'll lose what we have and not get what we want. We're afraid that people will reject us. We're afraid that we won't be successful. We have all these fears, and just look at the society as it is right now. We used to be shocked if a politician lied. It used to be a headline. So and so lied. It's like now it doesn't even get a line in the paper. So and so lied. Of course they lied. That's what they do. So our whole relationship with the truth is so out of balance. But if I can't deal with the truth, then I can't. I'm always trying to figure out some way. Either you would, for example, in a relationship, there's two things. Either you adjust the relationship to the truth, or you adjust the truth to the relationship. And most people spend their time adjusting the truth. I'm going to change the truth so the relationship can.
Well, folks, we are disconnected for the very last time from Barnes. Dr. Barnes Boffey, thank you sincerely for being a good sport and hanging in and hanging in and hanging in our chopped up but very meaningful interview. If people want to get in touch with you, Barnes, I know you'll give me that information so I can share that information with others, because I know people will want to be in touch. I also feel quite certain that people will want to know how to get your books. And so if you give me that information, we'll be sure to send that out as well. So for the final interview for the Mental Health and Happiness Summit, this is Nancy Buck saying thanks for joining us.